Hello and welcome to Learner Safety. I'm George Hansham here once again with Kenna Miller, Alyssa Imes, and Victoria Bai, where we are chatting about learner safety and really what we have to do, the behaviors we have to accomplish, not have to accomplish, but behaviors that help create learner safety, because it is the second stage of psychological safety, the second of the four stages of psychological safety. And as we learned earlier, inclusion safety is the first one, and that's a basic human right. That's given as long as there is no intent to harm. So you should be given inclusion safety unless you have an intent to harm. That's the only time that is not a given. And learner safety is the first one that's really earned, and we're going to kind of get into that in a moment here. So let's just kind of take a look at learner safety.
So, learner safety satisfies the basic human need to learn and grow. You feel safe in the learning process, asking questions, giving and receiving feedback, experimenting, and even making some mistakes. So, we're going to just dive right in. And what are some of your guys' thoughts on this?
I see learner safety as kind of just a feeling of being able to try new things and to kind of lead your own learning process as well, going the direction that you want, receiving and giving feedback to whoever you're learning with, whether that be a teacher or coworker or that type of relationship, and also not being afraid to make mistakes. So kind of just knowing that as you enter the situation, you are going to make mistakes no matter what, and not having that fear of, oh no, what if I don't do this right? Or what if I, whatever the situation is, not having that fear holding you back in your learning process.
Ooh, I love that, because when you come into a team, even if you're included, if you're not given that learner safety, you're never really going to learn the ropes. You're never going to kind of know all the inside knowledge that the team has, right? Because you can't ask questions. Like I actually worked at a place where there was not learner safety at one point, and if you would ask questions, you just kind of be met with, well, how come you don't know that? And that way you had a lot of people who were, um, I call them imposters. They because they wouldn't ask the questions. They would not ask, hey, what does this mean? How do we do this? Kind of, get that institutional knowledge passed down from person to person. So a lot of people would just not ask and pretend they knew it, and they didn't know it. So it was kind of interesting to see how that played out in the organization. Let's dive in. So in learner safety, we, as a leader, as a team leader, even a formal or informal, we encourage people to learn in exchange for their engagement to learn. So, and when we say learn, we just don't mean new topics. We mean learn about the team, learn about the internal culture. Yes, learn about topics as well. But it's really an encouragement to learn in exchange for that engagement to learn. So when people ask questions, when people are curious, when our team members really want to take that deeper dive, we encourage that. And that encouragement is earned through the consistent engagement with the learning process. So that's why this is really the first earned stage for psychological safety. What are some ways that we can encourage learning? Encourage people to learn.
I think by asking questions. I know when people ask me questions, it encourages me to want to do more research and learn more about something.
Oh, so really kind of role model what's going on.
Yes.
Okay. So as we role model what's happening, that requires vulnerability, and that's, since psychological safety is really defined by Tim Clark as rewarded vulnerability. So if we want people to be vulnerable, we have to be vulnerable first.
Mm-hmm.
If we want people to learn, we have to be that learner first, right? And if you're if you're the leader, uh, what's it look like when a leader role models learner safety or their learning? What's that kind of look like?
I would say an example of that is when the leader works with the people who they may be leading and really asks them questions about what they do and is very familiar with the work or not necessarily at the workplace but even leaders of like clubs or different
Right.
types of groups like that when they're familiar with what the people who they are leading do and their needs and they really have a relationship where they learn from each other. I was going to mention too, I really like this quote from the book, The Encouragement to Learn in Exchange for Engagement to Learn, because I do really think that learning happens from both of those standpoints where, um, you have to be engaged in your own learning and you do have to put the effort forward to kind of direct your own learning process, but you oftentimes also need to be encouraged to learn or at least given the opportunities to learn new things as well.
Yeah, that's a great point coming from both sides because as a learner, if you're engaged to learn, you're ready. But if you're met with a leader that doesn't provide the same reaction, then over time you just lose that engagement and back off in a sense because they're not giving the learning that you're seeking. So it's a balance of both sides.
Yeah, that's a great point. I really see the encouragement to learn and the engagement to learn as like a continuous cycle where if you are encouraged to learn, then it's just a repeating where one follows the other and it's just continuous. So I think that's a really cool aspect of it.
Yeah, I totally see where you're coming from with that because when you're encouraged to learn, that kind of helps you feel engaged or helps
Mhm.
you want to engage in the learning process. And then if as the leader, if I'm the team member and I see the leader being authentically curious and asking some questions and then role modeling that the learning, then it kind of opens up the door for me to do that as a team member.
Mhm.
Kind of really makes it difficult for me not to, when we embrace that, right? At least I think that's kind of the gist that I get from our conversation so far. So when we have that encouragement to learn in exchange for that engagement to learn, um, that's really powerful because it begins to cultivate. We talked in our first session on inclusion safety. We talked about cultivating that garden. So that's really uh, helping to in cultivate and really foster the growth of individuals, of employees within the environment, because culture is what really creates high performing teams, and that's psychological safety. That's the culture. So if we have learner safety, how do you know when it's safe to learn? How do you know? Does it? What do you think?
I think for me, it's when I'm able to ask questions, and in those questions, the people I'm working with really encourage me to kind of follow that lead and learn more about it, and it makes me feel supported.
Oh, nice. Now, Kenna, you thought of that phrase that we had where in the previous slide here when we said encouragement to learn in exchange for the engagement to learn. That really stuck out to you. Does does that have a feel to it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think, if you are not encouraged to learn throughout your life, then it would take a whole lot of internal motivation to get where you want to go, which, that's definitely possible. But um, I think encouragement along the way, especially from many different people, just to give you those opportunities to learn what you want to learn and to encourage you, like Alyssa mentioned, to ask questions, to explore, to learn more about whatever the topic is, to try new things, and to feel comfortable doing so, and to feel like you are able to fail without repercussions. I think all of those things kind of compiled into one just lead to a much better learning experience. And it does achieve that learner safety no matter what group you're in, whether it's in a classroom, on a team, in some other type of group. So I think all of those things compiled kind of contribute the most to it.
And you kind of brought up a great point about many people speaking into that, many people encouraging you to learn. That's a great point. So it's not just the leader, everybody on the team should be encouraging everybody else. And we could do that through role modeling and everything else as well. It kind of reminds me when I was working for Lockheed Martin, we built a composite where we built the mock leading edges of the F-35, and it was a composite training course. It was either 40 or 80 hours. I forget the exact number of hours now. I want to say it was 80 hours, so 2 weeks. And one thing that we built into the course that had some really big benefits that we had no idea about at the time when we were building it in, because we just thought, oh yeah, this would be a good idea. Let's try it and see what happens. And we had so many positive ramification from it, unintended consequences of good. What it was we built a course, and then there were the initial projects. Students didn't have like a final grade or a pass fail on the initial projects. They got to try it out, test it out, right? So the instructor would notice somebody who's simply not following the process. The process was very clear, step by step, written out, had pictures, everything else. But yeah, in the beginning, you know what? Sometimes we miss a step or we skip a step or whatever, and inevitably somebody, at least one or two people would do that. And then they would take their composite part. So you'd have this big metal tool and you'd lay this fiberglass. It was graphite composite, but you would lay it over the tool and then you'd pack it down. You'd hook a big, huge vacuum up to it. So it had a certain amount of pressure. Then you had to roll the whole thing into this big monstrous oven for however many hours to cook. And then it would come out. So if you missed a step in the process, when you brought it out and you took all the packaging and stuff off of it that you had to have in, it would have defects. So you're talking, in the shop, if you're doing an actual life-size part, 100 hours of work down the drain. Multiply that by $75, that's how much you lost right there, plus the whatever cost for the parts. Well, we would have it in the shop, and the instructor would let it go, right? And then when they pull the part out, they'd have the defect, and it would be like they have this one thing. It's called a resin rich or resin starved. So in plastics, it's glue basically, right? So you would have areas that it was just the plastic and there was no resin, so it would just break. It was brittle and would just snap off. And that's because they didn't follow the process. So because the instructor let them fail, let them kind of make that mistake, and they say, hey, we got a defect here. So they would do self-inspection. They'd find the defect, or if they didn't find it, the instructor would help them find the defect. And then that student we had this big table with a mirror on top. So there's like 20 students at a time. They would gather around and they could see the part from the mirror and all this. So they would point out what the defect was, and then together they would figure out why it happened. So it wasn't like blaming fingers. Oh, George, you messed up because you didn't do this or you didn't do that. It was, okay, we got a problem here. What happened? So it kind of framed it as we need to troubleshoot and learn and figure this out rather than point fingers when something happened. And what happened was when these folks went to the shop, generally it took like 8 weeks to get them proficient in doing the job by themselves once they got to the shop. Well, after going through the class, the new one where we put in the mistakes, it would take them like one person did it in a week, most people are like 2 weeks. So they saved a ton of money because they were now capable at a much faster time. So when we talk about mistakes, and mistakes are okay, when you use the power of a mistake, you can literally change the direction of an organization. It's kind of crazy because, I mean, when you figure 8 weeks at 40 weeks, so that's what, 320 hours, multiply that by the rate of $70+ to manufacture when you factor everything in, and then times it by 2, and that's what it would take, because you'd have to have an individual with you over time, over those 8 weeks, working on the same project. So that doubled the cost of that build. Well, took that in 1 to 2 weeks, we got rid of that cost. It was amazing. So all that huge long story to say that really quickly, uh, when you embrace mistakes, you can have a direct effect on the organization and the proficiency of the organization. That's why it's stage 2 of the high performing teams. All right. But so now I took up all the time for that one on how you know when it's safe to learn. What else? What else does it feel like? How do we know that we're safe to learn if it's not explicit? Should it be explicit?
That's such a great story, George, because instead of saying, "Oh, person A did this and now he's costing it's all his fault. He's costing us X amount of money," they went back and re-looked at what their training was and how do I make the training better so person A or B doesn't make the same mistakes, and it lets the new set of students see, oh, if be careful if you're at this time, make sure you go through the process or else this is gonna be the results. And yeah, that's along with that, I just wanted to add on top of asking questions is embracing feedback, providing constructive feedback. It's a lot. It's, as the leader, instead of immediately pointing, hey, person A, you did that wrong. This is gonna happen to you. You're gonna be on XYZ plan or whatever. Provide the constructive feedback. See what went wrong. Why did it happen? How can we help that person? So that way it doesn't happen. So that way they can learn from their mistakes that's how we learn best.
That's a great point, because if we are able to learn from our mistakes, then we're not going to have to repeat them all the time. So kind of if you find yourself putting out these little fires all the time of things that go wrong, and it's the same thing over and over and over again, check your learner safety within the team, right? Because we haven't learned. We're still making the same mistakes. We haven't learned. That's good stuff. Oh, now have you heard of this one before? Learning is intellectual and emotional. That kind of fits with our tagline for our team, right? So now you know what this means to me. When we're done, we have to get the tagline right. We're under pressure now to get the tagline right. So really, learning is intellectual and emotional. It's got a feel to it, right? And if someone is in that defensive emotional state, they literally have a cognitive impairment where they cannot learn. So if I'm going into work and I'm like, okay, what's going on today? What am I going to be chastised for now? And I'm kind of looking around. I'm not open to be able to learn. It's a lot harder for me to learn. It really is. And for somebody such as myself, when it's hard to learn in the first place, that makes it double hard, because I have to learn things a few times before they actually stick. Have you felt that before at all, or what do we think about this statement here?
I had a situation similar in a previous workplace where we had a new curriculum and a new way of teaching it to our students, and they brought in all the trainers from the curriculum company to train us for a whole week, and then we had to go back and implement it with our students, and that was it. If we made a mistake or we made a blunder somewhere, you will be pulled aside and given a note saying, hey, you didn't do X, Y, and Z. I need you to do X, Y, and Z next time, without really providing the feedback of, okay, how do I improve on my teaching methods? And how do I make it better for my students? So
Really?
over time, that just caused amongst the staff, okay, we better get the script right. We better teach exactly as what the training said. And indirectly, it made us all, like you said, looking over our backs. And also we turn into robots instead of, when teaching is supposed, you're human, you're meant to make mistakes, and your students are not just robots that you can follow scripts.
Right. That's a great example, because when you're teaching something, you should be more, spirit filled, as they say, because you want to really pour out everything that you have. And it circles back to your comment. I think you were the one that made the comment about feedback earlier. Being able to receive feedback is hugely important. So, as a leader, if we don't give good feedback, or even if we're an informal leader, if we don't give effective feedback, we're not helping people grow. We're not creating that learner safety if we don't give that good feedback, and if we're not open to feedback as well. That's interesting. So has anybody had feedback that that just doesn't work? One of those horrible blunder stories where feedback just did not connect. Vic started off with that great one about people just tell them, okay, you didn't do this, this, and this, didn't chime in on how to help, which in feedback you want to put in where you need to go, because there's a neat thing. Okay, psychology 101. I love psychology, right? People are going to focus on where you place that bar. So if you are talking to them about what they're doing wrong, they're going to focus on what they're doing wrong. Now we have to point that out in feedback, but the gist of feedback is to get them to focus on where they need to be. So the steps that they need to go to get to the position we need them at on the team. And that's why psychological safety works so well, because we focus on where we need to get within that team so we can be high performing. So has anybody else received feedback kind of like Vic did, where it just was not effective and kind of made you feel a little cringy?
Yeah, I have definitely received feedback like that before, and it's kind of just, unhelpful. And like you said, it doesn't really help you get to that target of whatever you need to be achieving. But one thing that I did want to add to is I think it is helpful to start on something that the person has done good or done well, talk about areas of improvement, and kind of create a plan to help them get to whatever level you want them to, and then also end on something that they do well. Because I think by adding those bits in there of encouragement and letting them know that you see what they're doing well, it is also encouraging and helps them not focus so heavily on any areas where they can improve.
I love that. So you're really building them a roadmap.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to kind of approach it. Nobody likes getting feedback like, you're wrong, you didn't do this right, do better. Nobody likes that. If you're putting in the effort of, okay, you may have missed the mark, but here's what we can do to get you there, then it shows, well, that like you said, that's the basis of having a psychologically safe team. Having that safety to fail and know that you're going to be helped to get to where you need to be.
Yeah, I love that. The safety to fail and know that you're going to get to where you need to be. I love that comment, because it's so true. Yeah, I dropped the ball, did whatever, but I know where I need to go now. And when you know where you need to go, you're more likely to succeed. Nothing's 100%, but you're more likely. I love that. I'm going to steal that one. And it does. And if you're stressed out about the environment, so let's say you don't even have inclusion safety, you're going to be a little stressed out, hiding, wearing your mask, whatever you want to call it. You're not going to be ready to learn either, because learner safety is really putting you in that state where you're able to learn. And that feedback, like what we were talking about, is a big, big part of that. That was cool. And then this and this directly from Tim Clark, model, encourage, protect. That's how we kind of show learner safety, how we create that environment of learner safety. Model, encourage, protect. So we've talked about being that role model. What does it take to be a role model? We kind of hit on that briefly earlier. Does anybody want to expand on that at all?
Sure, I can expand a little bit. I think a lot goes into it, but not only taking on the activities like we mentioned, asking questions, making sure that you allow other people to feel safe on your team to learn and make mistakes and to ask you questions, but also modeling that behavior and asking either coworkers, teammates, or even the leader, if that's not you, questions about what they do and allowing them to feel psychologically safe as well.
Excellent. So if you want it, you got to be the role model. So you have to learn. I love that idea. And then encourage, that kind of goes right back to the definition of psychological safety: encouragement to learn, or engagement to learn. So that kind of highlights that not two-step, but two-way process, that multiple people encouraging you and then you actually engaging in the learning. Engage, and protect. How can we protect as either a formal or informal leader? What are some ways we can protect learner safety? What do we think? And I think from my perspective, one way that we can do that is to, when somebody has a question, and let's say somebody on the team kind of begins to ridicule, sometimes it could rise to that level, or just somebody being snarky. Snarkiness can derail a team really quickly, so we don't want snarkiness in there. So we have to protect that. So we have to, as a leader, either formal or informal, we need to shut that down really quickly. But we have to shut it down in a way where we build relationships from it, right? So it's not just like, hey, stop. No, that doesn't work very well. But if somebody's being snarky, we'll say, hey, well, you know what? Ken, I really appreciate the way that you are trying to grow in this area and the questions that you're asking, things like that. So I appreciate how that works. And we always want to, and then kind of just focus on that. And then whatever snarkiness happened, that will go away quickly. Now, if it rises to another level, then you deal with that directly and say, hey, you know what? That's not what we do as a team. We want to celebrate this person for learning. So how do you think we could celebrate her instead of, being snarky or whatever you want to be? Instead of ridiculing, how can we lift her up rather than ridicule? How do you think we can do that? So even when we're providing that air cover that we talked about in inclusion safety, we want to do it in a way that is helpful for everyone on the team. So you have to give that person that was ridiculing an out, to change themselves. You can't just blast and be done, because then they don't have an out, because they need to feel good about themselves too, and kind of retract and fix themselves, right themselves, as they say. That's kind of my thought about it. Anybody else want to share a thought they have about it? Or maybe what you've seen?
I have a thought. I kind of wanted to talk about learner safety as a whole, but from like a very simplistic point of view. So for me, when I was thinking about this, I reflect on like a sport. And when you have a coach, you either have a really supportive coach or you have one that maybe isn't as supportive. So in learner safety, I'm going to use the sport baseball. I don't know a lot about it, but I feel like most people do. So let's say you're a pitcher and you're trying to learn how to throw a curveball, and maybe you're really good at the fastball, but you're terrible at the curveball. But if you have a coach that really encourages you to try to throw that curveball, you feel like you're able to make that mistake and maybe not throw it perfectly. And then you can ask your coach questions because you know that you're not going to get ridiculed for maybe the poor throw. And then they're going to give you feedback on your throw. So I think, to simplify it, if you're trying to learn about learner safety, think about like a sport and how would you want to be coached through throwing a curveball, I guess, or if you play a sport, whatever sport that may be. But that's kind of my thinking process, because when I learn, I need it to be a little bit more simple and like more relatable, I guess.
You know, that's kind of brilliant. You know what that does as well? That breeds self-efficacy as a leader, if you think from that perspective.
Mm.
Because, we're always putting our team first, right? Team first, individual second. If you're thinking from that perspective, how would I like to have learned this? Then you're going to come up with some real gems and really have a big effect on your team. You know what? What's fun? Can I tell one more story? Am I done with stories? Can I tell one more?
Go for it.
Okay. And I was it was at Lockheed again, and I was in charge of going through the job testing, and we didn't have the expertise, so we hired an outside contractor to come in. It was an outside company, and it was actually 3 folks came in, and they knew all about employment testing. They had all their high level degrees and everything about it. And there's one person in there who I'm still a friend with today by the name of Dan, and he would, and this relates exactly to your story of how would you like to have done this. And we were interviewing a bunch of subject matter experts, so a bunch of mechanics, electronics folks, technicians, you name it, we had them in there. And this kind of just blew my mind as a trainer. He asked the magic question. So here's Dan, who's quiet. So whenever Dan would speak, people would kind of lean in to listen. And he asked the folks, he said, well, how would you have liked to have learned this? And he just dropped it there. And then he asked another one because it was about testing. So we were talking about learning the content. And then we started talking about testing. And then he said, how do you show that you're a master at your craft? And he just it was just that mic drop moment, because when he asked those 2 questions, humbly, quietly, and here's somebody with a whole lot of degrees and a whole lot of great experience, just asked that, the room just flooded with amazing teamwork, amazing content that came out. And you could literally see how people embrace that when he just asked those 2 questions that you just asked. And I just thought that was amazing. Wow. Man, any other nuggets like that? No, we've got a lot of nuggets today, man. So what specific behaviors would you role model? Which ones would you, my favorite, I'll go first. My favorite from the behavior guide, because we have our behavior guide, is frame problems before you solve problems. Because and this used to be a thing of mine. I used to love problems that I didn't even understand. I used to love solving problems that I didn't even understand yet. So if you frame that problem correctly and get a better understanding, then you're role modeling to everybody else on the team. Hey, don't panic. Don't get crazy. Let's frame this. What's the actual problem? And then let's learn together and figure out the solution. So that's my favorite from there. Who else has one?
My favorite is adopting a student mindset. So even if I think I know something, just in the back of my mind wanting to figure out what I don't know. and constantly learning about it.
Ooh, constantly learning. I love that.
Mine is, oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to ask. I thought you had one. Kenna, you're on.
I do. Mine is to say that I don't know if I don't know. And I think that's something I do a lot. If I don't know, I'm not just going to make up the answer. I'll, try to go find it out. And I think too, there is, you can be scared to say that you don't know something, but I kind of look at it as an opportunity to learn whatever that thing is, or to find out whatever I don't already have an answer to. So I really like that one.
Oh yeah, and that's modeling vulnerability too. That's awesome. Because when you model that vulnerability and say you don't know, the team's probably going to step right up in line with you and step and help. That's cool. Vic, how about yourself? Do you have a favorite one?
Yeah, I liked how he talked about failure is not the end, but it's a time to learn and move forward. Because mistakes and failures can happen, and it's challenging, but instead of seeing it as it's over, see how you that story really resonated with me, George, about how they used the mistake and returned the training into something even better. So use that as an opportunity to learn from your mistakes, and how do you move forward from there?
That's great, because how do you move forward from mistakes? Because people are going to make mistakes.
Mhm.
And if we don't learn from them, we're going to make them again. And again and again and again, and until it's kind of like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. So those are really some great points, because when we're vulnerable, when we have that mindset as a student, and when we really just utilize it as a learning process, we're going to create that environment where we really start to become high performing. We're that team. So where that pitcher's throwing that curveball, because one thing about I love baseball as well. World Series. We'll date this podcast. It's not evergreen because the Astros. No, not the Astros. The Rangers just won the World Series. That would have been horrible. Hope there weren't any Rangers fans in there when I messed that up. But how they throw that curveball, they're going to have a faster learning curve. So a lot of times it's kind of steady how people learn. But when you're in whether it's a sport or on a business team, whatever team it may be, and you have a lot of learner safety, you actually kind of start going up at a much steeper curve. So you learn a lot faster and you get better with it because you're not afraid to practice. Because, I mean, let's face it, if you had a bad coach and you're throwing that curveball, you're kind of getting tired of throwing the curveball because you're just getting told you're bad at it all the time, and being nitpicked apart. We don't want that. So learner safety really doesn't do that. So learner safety is the second stage of psychological safety. And once you get there, we're going to march into next week into contributor safety, which that one is earned as well. Any overstatements about psychological safety before we use our tagline to check out? All right, somebody else lead it, because I led it last week and it didn't, and we messed it up. So who wants to lead it this week? Oh, Ken's mic's not off.
All right. 1, 2, 3.
This is
what
learning
learning feels like. Oh, we're getting so close. Did we get it that time? We'll have to watch the recording. I don't know. If we do, we're gonna have to celebrate. All right. Well, thanks everybody, and we'll see you in the discussion boards.